An archipelago that few paid attention to in the past, a barren archipelago like solitary rocks in the open sea. However, in recent years, China and Japan have been constantly pass-overing, and not only that. If you look at the East China Sea map, you'll see a small cluster of islands that you need to zoom in closely to see. This cluster of islands lies isolated, with Japan's Okinawa to the north, China's Fujian coast to the west, and Taiwan Island to the south. That small cluster of islands is what Japan calls the Senkaku Islands, or what China calls Diaoyu. The Senkaku Islands, also known as Diaoyu, consist of 5 uninhabited islands and 3 rocky reefs in the sea. The size of each island and reef ranges from about 800 square meters to 4.32 square kilometers. Each side has its own name. China calls this archipelago Diaoyu. Diaoyu appears in many ancient Chinese documents, but why is it called Diaoyu? Means fishing. Because during their journey from Fujian to Okinawa, Chinese envoys often stopped to survey or report when passing through the sea area. The rocky islands rising from the sea had no trees, no inhabitants, but the surrounding waters are rich in fish. So fishermen during the Ming and Qing dynasties often stopped by the fish, then moved on, especially for tuna and mackerel. Therefore, they call this area Diaoyu, meaning the rocky fishing grounds. Meanwhile, Japan calls it Senkaku. Senkaku appeared much later, believed to date from around the 20th century. Its origin began in the 19th century, when Japan surveyed the East China Sea to modernize the country. They sent many geographical survey teams here to study these rocky islands. Some Japanese scholars and cartography experts wrote reports, describing the shape of these islands as very angular. In Japanese, the word Senkaku means sharp cliff or pointed rocky cape, islands with sharp peaks. And since the early 20th century, this name has been used. Thus, China uses the name Diaoyu. Japan only uses Senkaku. The US uses Japan's name to align with the Okinawa administration system. Taiwan calls it Diaoyu. Each side has a different name, and each name asserts sovereignty as well as each side's perspective. This island has no residents, no houses, no gas stations, no signs of nor any villages, generally no signs of normal life. The total area of the entire cluster is only about 7 square kilometers. 7 square kilometers is of course very, but why is it so important despite being so small, and why do both China, Japan, and even Taiwan all desire to possess Diaoyu? The biggest reason has always been strategic location. The Diaoyu Islands, also known as the Senkaku Islands, lie right at the strategic edge, where Chinese warships, submarines, and aircraft must pass to advance into the Pacific. If Japan holds this archipelago and establishes a base, China would feel uncomfortable. Conversely, if China controls Senkaku or Diaoyu, they could push their fleet further out, putting pressure on Okinawa, where the US has a strategic military base. The first reason is geography, and the second reason is what lies beneath this archipelago. That is energy. Here, energy we understand as oil. Japan is naturally poor in natural resources, almost entirely dependent on it. A resource-rich sea area near home is always extremely attractive. And China is the same. Their massive industry needs oil and gas, just like we need oxygen to breathe. Even just a suspicion, without needing proven reserves, is enough to make both countries desire to possess Diaoyu or Senkaku. The third reason why both countries are always heated about this issue is national face. In East Asia or any region of the world, territory is not just land, territory is not just water but also honor. The Chinese must possess Diaoyu, the Japanese must possess Senkaku. Therefore, neither side concedes to the other. However, before the tensions as seen today, in the past, the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands were uninhabited territory. No one cared, but now it's completely different and controversial. The funniest thing in history hundreds of years ago, no one paid attention to Senkaku or Diaoyu. Chinese fishermen often stopped by. Okinawans also passed through during their sea journeys. They went there. But there was no military presence, no house building, no village establishment or tax collection. In terms of international law, that land was almost terra for a long period. The turning point truly appeared in 1895, when Japan defeated the Qing dynasty in the First Sino-Japanese War. Japan at that time was rising rapidly, with ambitions to become a modern power. And they decided to annex the Senkaku Islands into their. More importantly, this action wasn't opposed by China. The Qing dynasty had just lost the war, and even more interestingly, in the treaty Shimonoseki, the treaty that forced the Qing to cede Taiwan to Japan. The Senkaku Islands were completely From 1895 onward, Japan had people living on the islands, had businesses hung to exploit tuna, had fish processing factories, tax collections, meaning Japan had actual control from that year. And throughout this period, China made no state-level response. By the time of World War II, when Japan, the U.S. stepped in to administer Okinawa and also administered Senkaku. In 1969, a UN report said that sea area might have over 10 billion barrels of oil. Then disputes began to erupt. China began mentioning these islands. Taiwan also claimed sovereignty. The land that no one had mentioned for hundreds of years before suddenly became something everyone wanted. By 1972, the U.S. returned Okinawa to Japan, and also handed over administrative controls, but the U.S. said they were only returning administrative control, and weren't intervening in sovereignty. Therefore, the Senkaku or Diaoyu issue heated up again. Let's look at each side. First is Japan's perspective. Japan considers the Senkaku Islands belong to Japan because in 1895, they formally annexed the islands after surveying and confirming they were terra nullius. From then, Japan continuously administered them, with taxes, residents, and for over 70 years no one objected. The U.S. administered them on Japan's behalf after World War II and returned them to Japan in 19... So Japan considers itself the only legitimate sovereign. China also says Diaoyu is their land in ancient documents from the 14th century. There were records and Chinese people once fished in this area. China views Japan's 1895 annexation as wartime land seizure, an act of aggression that should be invalidated. They believe after World War II, all lands Japan occupied must be returned, and the Diaoyu Islands are among them. Taiwan, also known as the Republic of China, argues that the Diaoyu Islands are a national because Taiwan was occupied by Japan in 1895. When Japan returned Taiwan after the war, they believe they should also return the Diaoyu Island. In summary, Japan asserts that they have acted lawfully, maintained continuous, and since no one objected, the islands belong to them. China claims that their ancestors once visited and utilized the area. Japan seized it through war, so the islands should rightfully belong to China. Meanwhile, Taiwan asserts that it is an extension of Taiwan and should belong to Taiwan. Both, or rather all three, had their own arguments. The issue is not about who is right, but that no one is willing to acknowledge the other's points. This is what makes the dispute impossible to resolve through dialogue, and no new direction has been found yet. Looking back at history, from the 1970s to the 1990s, Sino-Japanese bilateral relations were relatively warm, but that golden era did not last. Entering the 21st century, China became the world's second largest economy, surpassing Japan. Its military power also grew rapidly, and the need to assert territorial status increased accordingly. Meanwhile, Japan faces pressures from an aging population, economic stagnation, and growing concerns over China's rise. Thus, the conflict over the Senkaku Islands, also known as Diaoyu, became a volatile flashpoint. One major incident occurred in 2010, when a Chinese fishing boat collided with a Japanese Coast Guard vessel near the Diaoyu Senkaku Island. Japan detained the Chinese captain, and China reacted so strongly that it halted rare earth exports to Japan. Relations deteriorated sharply from then on, and stories related to Senkaku were no longer about fishermen but about nations and militaries. Another incident happened in 2012 when the Japanese government decided to nationalize some of the Senkaku Islands. Their intention was actually to prevent a nationalist politician from purchasing them and building monuments of barracks, which could escalate tensions. But China viewed it differently, believing Japan was seizing the opportunity to consolidate sovereignty. It's important to know that in the past, parts of these islands were privately owned. From 2012 to the present, the area around the Senkaku Islands has almost weekly, monthly, or yearly been a stage for Japan and China to display their strength. Chinese Coast Guard vessels appear here, Japanese Coast Guard vessels appear, fighter jets appear here, and radar appears here. In 2013, China expanded its tactics by establishing an air defense identification zone in the East China Sea and overlapping it with the area long managed by Japan declared non-recognition, while the U.S. flew aircraft through it as a statement of support for Japan. Since then, Senkaku has no longer been a bilateral dispute. Diaoyu has no longer been a bilateral, but a confrontation involving Japan, China. Each side knows that even a minor collision or an accidental ship bump could lead to a crisis. In summary, the Senkaku Islands are so small that one could walk across them in just a few hours, but they are located precisely where geography, economy, energy, and military are all crucial and competitive. If like a bottleneck, whoever controls that point controls the entire sea region. That is why the story of the Senkaku Islands is not just about land, not just a story about rocks and seawater, but also an issue of sovereignty, strategy, and national honor. And is a confrontation between China and Japan, also involving the US and Taiwan. This video does not determine who is right or wrong or who has sovereignty, but only presents analytical so that you can learn more. Therefore, even though this archipelago is only about 7 square kilometers in area, with no residents or house, it still becomes one of the most dangerous hotspots in the world. Thank you for following this story. If you found it interesting, please subscribe to the Hidden Ledger channel, turn on the notification bell, and share the video. Now, it's time. Hesitate, please leave your feedback and we